And we're going to move into a transition into three women as we move towards the end of this Legends series for the summer. Three women that we feel have incredible importance to our life as we take a look at their life in Scripture. And I want you to know this. It's been my experience as I've traveled around the world, as I've kind of lived my life. I've just noticed this, that there's not a person in this room, rich or poor, good looking, right? Turn to the person next to you, good looking or otherwise, however you want to look at them. Good looking or otherwise, rich or poor. There's nobody who's well dressed or poorly dressed, or someone who may be black or white or brown or maybe Republican or Democrat. There's no one who is a CEO of a corporation or a janitor inside that corporation. There's not anybody. It doesn't matter. Maybe you don't know what label to place on yourself. Maybe you're a little bit confused about where you come from and what your identity is. There's no difference. I don't care what you have going on in life. There's not a person in this room who does not have a problem, who does not have problems. Plural, right? Listen, the person maybe that you've been hating on for a while, they have problems. The person who you've seen their successes in life and you become envious of and maybe jealous of because maybe they're living the life that you wanted to live. Or maybe because they're not going through what you're currently going through. But I can guarantee you they are going through something, because everyone in this world, everyone in this room, everyone on this stage, everyone has problems. Why don't you turn to your neighbor and say, everyone, you got a problem. Right? You got problems. Isn't that true? Whether you're white people have problems, black people have problems, right? Rich people have problems, poor people have problems, single people have problems, married people have problems. Single people tell me all the time, I just wish I had a companion, someone, so I don't have to sleep in my bed all by myself. Married people tell me all the time, I wish I could get that someone out of my bed so I could sleep somewhere all the time, right? Everybody is envious of something. Skinny people seem to be drinking things that say weight on, and fat people seem to be drinking things that are weight off. We all have problems. Isn't that true? People who have long hair want short hair. People who have short hair or no hair are trying to buy hair. And so God kind of gave me this idea to share with you this morning. And it's simply this thought, that our problems actually serve a purpose. Our problems actually serve a purpose. And before you start shaking your fist at God because of your problems and because of your circumstances or because you're not getting what you're wanting, understand this, that if God allowed it to happen to you, that He's going to work that thing for your good. But in the meantime, you know this about our problems. Our problems create an uncertainty in our life. Anyone in here facing uncertainty? Man, all of us. Levels of uncertainty. When your options have run out, when all of your alternatives have kind of gone away, and it's in those times that it's been my experience that those are the times when your faith has the greatest potential to grow. When you are forced to look to the invisible to deal with the impossible. And that's you and I. And we can't always see that our problems are a privilege from God. I realize that's hard to hear. We can't always see that our troubles are just a test from God. But I can promise you this, that if God allowed it to happen to you, then He is going to work that thing out for your good. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? If you have your Bible, I want you to turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 1. We're going to be in the Old Testament this morning, and it's in about the first fourth of your Bible. If you don't have one, there's a Bible in the pew in front of you. And 1 Samuel chapter 1. If you don't have a Bible, feel free to take that Bible. While you're turning to 1 Samuel chapter 1, I got to tell you this, that 27 years ago, Ruth Ann and I had been blessed with our oldest son, Justin. And Ruth Ann's first pregnancy was just fairly normal. Justin was born on time. He was born healthy as a healthy baby. And as kind of time went by, not very much time, but as time went by, we started talking, having conversation as parents do, as husband and wives do, about having another child and having another child added to our family. And we weren't expecting any problems to come our way. And soon after that conversation, our excitement over Ruth Ann's next pregnancy turned to a lot of complications, which followed into a miscarriage, and we lost our child. Soon after that, we had another pregnancy, a third pregnancy, and that in turn led to a heartache because we lost yet another child. And I can promise you, we sat in our room, we begged God to intervene because of the situation of our life. And soon after that, we discovered that Ruth Ann was not only pregnant, but she was pregnant with twins. And she was carrying a second child with the first child in her body. And we soon after that realized that second child passed away as well, and we lost yet another child. But God was gracious. God allowed us to carry that other child in the womb to term, and really not quite to term, almost to term. 29 weeks of Ruth Ann's pregnancy, I had come home from a long day of work, and I had some food in my hands, and I had brought supper home to Ruth Ann and Justin. And as I pulled rounded the corner, heading towards our house, I noticed that something was wrong. And as I pulled toward our house, my yard and my driveway was littered with an ambulance and a lot of first responders. I don't even know if I put my car in park. I know I probably didn't turn it off, but I opened the door and I started running to the front door, and a sheriff's deputy and a highway patrolman almost tackled me to the ground. And they told me, "You cannot go in. You cannot go in." And I was doing all I could, fighting them off, trying to get in to see what was going on. Nobody seemed to be telling me a whole lot, but one deputy sheriff said this to me. He said, "Joe, your wife, Ruth Ann, is hemorrhaging inside your home. Don't go in." And so I listened to them, and they said this: we're gonna take her to the hospital, and we're gonna give you an escort to the hospital. You can ride with us if you want, or you can drive. It doesn't matter. And I thought in my mind, I'm gonna outrun them, and so I thought I'll beat them to the hospital. But they got me to the hospital, and Ruth Ann survived that evening. But she had orders to stay in her bed for the rest of the pregnancy. And so for several weeks, I stood right next to the bedside of Ruth Ann day after day, and until the day after Halloween on November the 1st, I was standing there talking to Ruth Ann, and all of a sudden, as she was lying in this bed, not quite ready to have this baby, but the alarms on all of the machines that were helping her started to go off. And the alarms were sounding pretty loudly at that point, and the room all of a sudden was flooded with doctors and nurses who came rushing into the room. And I'll never forget, I can actually hear the voice of this elderly nurse who put her hand in the middle of my chest and pushed me to the only chair in the room. And she said these words to me: "You wait here." She pushed me down. And as quickly as that room had filled up with doctors and nurses, the room had emptied. And I sat there in an empty room in a hospital. And in my uncertainty came desperation. And desperation, you guys know what desperation is. Desperation is that voice that you shout out in prayer. Desperation is that voice that says, "God, I will do whatever it takes. If you will just do this one thing for me, I'll do whatever it takes. God, you intervene in some way because of this problem, because of this pain, because of this uncertainty. God, I'm desperate." Desperation is wanting what you don't have. And so listen, when we're desperate, we cry out for God. We call out for God. When we reach the end of our rope, we reach out to the one who can help. Listen, I know this, that when we're thrilled with life, we don't always thank God. But when we are uncertain in life, we certainly cry out to him. And that's the story of Hannah. Hannah's the legend that we want to take a look at this morning. Hannah, her story is found in 1 Samuel chapter 1, and her story is set during the period of the Judges. For those of you who don't know what judges were in Scripture, the judges were these local tribal leaders that God had simply put into place to deal with the problems of his people, to deal with the crises that were coming up so that they could make a judgment for God towards his people. You know this. You need to know this. Israel had been settled in this land of promise for about 200 years. They had landed in the land of promise because they had been in slavery in Egypt, and that was a problem, but God had rescued them from that problem, and they had escaped their situation, and God put them into this special land, and the people, these Israelites, had come into this great land with great expectations, with high aspirations, with incredible promises from God, with incredible hope for the future. And when they entered the land, they created places like this room, places for worship, places for sacrifice. And they began to live as God's people in this new place. And as the years passed by, they became more and more comfortable. They became more comfortable in their faith. Their fervor for God started to fade away as they began to face some new problems and new struggles and new crises in their life. Now, the priests who had been put there by God, they continued to offer worship. They continued to offer the opportunity to sacrifice. But the people, they could find little advantage in serving a God and keeping their commitments to God. As a matter of fact, the last verse of the book of Judges says this about the people of God. It says this, that everyone did as they wanted to do. Everyone did what they saw fit in life to do. They kind of neglected to do the things that God was asking of them. They just did what they wanted to do. And as you kind of turn the pages past the book of Ruth, you come across 1 Samuel chapter 1. And we're introduced to Hannah. Hannah's this woman who's facing an incredible level of uncertainty in her life. She's unable to have children. And her problem is not private. People knew. But her story is the story of Israel's future. See, God's story cannot continue without her story. And within the first few verses, we're introduced to the narrative's main characters. There's a guy by the name of Elkanah. He's the husband of Hannah. But there's also another woman involved. Her name is Peninnah. She is the second wife to Elkanah. She has children. Hannah does not. That is a problem. And that problem is filled with pain. And you know this, that it's an interesting family dynamic for a man to have two wives, right? And throughout the Bible, throughout God's word, every time we see a polygamous family, the people are always miserable. But within this story, as the story continues, each year this family, something great about this family would travel to those places that they had created for worship and for sacrifice. And they would go to that place. They'd travel to that place just to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. And listen, they had made up their minds as a family to be in the presence of the Lord for that time. And that's an incredible principle. We can't just stop on that principle. That's an incredible principle for you and I to consistently and constantly be and make up our minds to be in the presence of the Lord each week. One of those times, on one of those days of sacrifice, Elkanah, matter of fact, every day that they would offer those sacrifices, Elkanah would offer to Hannah a double portion of meat for sacrifice. And Elkanah would say to Hannah, listen, I love you the most. I love you best. That's why I'm giving you a double portion, because I love you more than I love her. And you know what that did to Peninnah. That infuriated her. That wounded her. To the point that she began to create a whole lot of different kinds of family dynamics. Different set of problems. And Peninnah does everything she can do to rub Hannah's face in her circumstances. And by favoring Peninnah, Elkanah just literally destroys his other wife's heart. And in the process, he makes Hannah miserable. And that's a problem. And that's what causes the pain. See, when miracles seem to be happening to those around you, to those things when it's not happening to yours, and they're happening in everyone's life around yours, it's really hard to trust that God knows what he's doing. And that type of hurt for Hannah, it affects your entire life because your heart gets broken and your spirit gets wounded. That's the Hannah kind of hurt that she is experiencing. And throughout this entire text in chapter 1, Hannah is miserable. Matter of fact, our English translation kind of mutes the wording just a little bit. It uses words like deep anguish and deeply distressed and brokenhearted, but in reality, it's this Hebrew word that literally means bitterness of soul. The bitterness of your soul. Like the worst kind of turmoil is the one that kind of takes place in your soul, deep within you. The bitterness of soul that leaves an unsettled ache inside of you. It lingers to the point that nothing anyone does or anything anyone tries will work. No amount of possibility thinking, no amount of positive psychology, no encouragement, no words of affirmation, no wishful thinking, no hoping. Sometimes prayer doesn't even get you out of the hurt. It's pain. Bitterness of pain that some of you, when you raised your hand, you knew the level of uncertainty that you're going through. Pain. Deep within. As a matter of fact, throughout this, it says Hannah wept much. The Hebrew word means to wail loudly. She was crying out loud so that everyone knew. Shrieking, perhaps, because of the pain in her soul. And Peninnah continues to rub Hannah's nose in her condition. She is so cruel to her. She was a provoked woman, an irritated woman. Here's a woman in enormous pain, roaring with grief. Why? Because she's childless. She's childless. She just wants to have children and she can't. Listen, I know this about most of us in this room and a lot of people in this world. Our sympathies kind of rise to the top whenever we know some woman who wants to have children but can't. Maybe that's your story. But I do know this, that childlessness in our Western society doesn't compare to that of ancient times. To understand her grief, to understand Hannah's grief and understand her pain, you have to understand her context. Because to be a childless woman in that culture, in ancient societies, a family's economic status, their wealth, and was directly related to how many children they had. It didn't matter if you were a farmer or a baker or a blacksmith or a shoemaker. The more children you had, the greater, the bigger the labor force that you had, and everything that you did was through your family. And the larger the labor force that you had, the more children that you had, the more productive you could be, which meant that you had more money that you could make. The more children meant more. It meant more money. It meant higher economic and social status. And you know this on the opposite side of that fewer children meant that you were less than. Lots of children, you were doing well. Fewer children, you were actually considered to be poor. Here's something maybe you didn't know, that in ancient cultures, ancient times, only about 4 out of 10 children actually survived and made it to adulthood. So having lots of children meant something. It actually meant that children were your social security and your retirement benefits. You literally would starve to death in your old age if you didn't have children to help you during your old age. They became not only your economic health, but your security in your future. And not only just in your family, but nationally. You should recognize this, that a higher birth rate meant the potential for a greater army, a bigger army. Lots and lots of children meant this, that it was a matter of life and death in a lot of different arenas. Therefore, any woman who had a lot of children were considered to be heroes. Heroes to their family, heroes to their tribe, heroes to their village, heroes to their nation. Like, this is more than just the emotionally fulfilling desire to have children. This is a matter of life and death. There is an enormous cultural pressure on women of that day to have children. Because without children, your family would literally die. Your tribe would literally die. Your nation would go away. Women of lots and lots of children were legendary. They were legends, heroes. And if you didn't, you were considered to be worthless. Worthless in your own eyes, worthless in their eyes. Listen, that level of cultural pressure placed on top of a natural desire of every woman to possess children carries a tremendous potential for problems and pain. Matter of fact, it drove women to the point that family and children became a system of idolatry. You remember what I told you idolatry is? You remember what an idol is? An idol is any good thing that becomes an ultimate thing. A good thing that you're supposed to enjoy that becomes the very center of your life. A good thing that you say this, because I have that, I have honor. Because I have this, I'm worthwhile. Because I have whatever, now I have meaning. And whatever becomes what you think is going to save you. See, in ancient societies, women were essentially pushed by their culture to make an idol out of their children and out of their family. You're nothing unless you have children. You're nothing unless you have a great family. That's where your status comes from. But think about in our modern culture today. In our individualistic culture today, meaning and significance doesn't come through children. It comes through competition. Being better at this or better than them. Women, you know this. Women, you know this. That you're told to be trim, to be slim, to be beautiful. That you have to be attractive in order to be important. See, every culture puts certain things in front of people that aren't God, but are meant to replace God. And you have to have this, or you have to have that, or you're nothing. When you're a disgrace. Whether that's money or fitness or family or children or power or possessions or degrees. Listen, the only way to escape an idol system, is to make sure that you have God be the most important thing in your life. And look at what's offered to Hannah. Peninnah, she represents the hope of her society. A society that says, build your identity on having children. And if you don't have children, she laughs in your face. Peninnah thought she was great because of what she had. Elkanah thought he was great because of what he did. He asked a really interesting question to Hannah one day. He was offering to her, here's the way to escape. Here's your way out. It's a psychological hope. And he offers her this. He says, listen, can't you see that I love you? Can't you see that I've provided for you? You should see that my love for you as your husband should be more important than having children. Look at what I've done for you. And ironically, Elkanah represents our modern society today. Don't build your identity on having children. Build your identity on being attractive, romance, having a husband. See, Peninnah thought she was great because of what she had. Elkanah thought he was great because of what he had done. But Hannah wanted neither. She knew that wasn't going to be the escape from her problems. The only way to escape an idol system is to make sure that God is in the center of everything in your life. See, Hannah became great, not because of what she had, and not because of what she had done. She became great because of who she knew. And a change takes place in the heart of Hannah. By the time we get to verse 9, it says that one of those times that they'd gone to a place of worship, it says this, that Hannah, after she had eaten, she stood up. Those two words kind of caught my eye as I was reading this passage. Stood up. What's the writer of Samuel trying to tell us? She stood up. Okay, she stood up after eating her meal. Literally, it meant this in Hebrew, that she arose. Doesn't just simply mean that she got up. It literally means that she became proactive, dealing with her problem. Hannah decides she had made up her mind, I'm going to do something about my problem. I'm going to do something about my situation. I'm going to pray to God. Here's something you need to understand. That authentic faith, true spirituality, has the ability to recognize the good things that are being offered to you from the ultimate things that God has for you. You need to have authentic faith that can tell the difference between the two. And there's nothing wrong with having children. There's certainly nothing wrong with having a husband. But there is something better about going to God. And so she arose, she got up from where she was, and she took her concerns to God, and she began to pray. I want you to know this, that as a church, I want you to get this principle in your life, that prayer is the plan. It's the best plan. It's the only plan to deal with the problems that you have and the pain that you're experiencing. It's the only plan that will get you into a form of escape from your situation. And so Hannah prays. And I love what she prays in verse 11, verse 10 and 11. She says this. She starts out her prayer this way. She says, "O Lord Almighty." She's remembering the majesty of God. The fact that he's omnipotent, the fact that he's all-powerful, that he's all-knowing, that he's sovereign, and she recognizes the superiority of God. She recognizes the one who has power, the one who has justice, the one who is greater than anyone else she's ever met in her life. And then she says these words, "Remember me. Remember me. Look upon the misery of your servant. Don't forget me when I'm stuck in my uncertainties. Please remember me, God." She's assuming that the broken heart of a lone, rural, obscure woman matters to the Lord. And she's taking the deepest needs of her heart and pouring them out into the presence of God. And I know this, men especially, you listen. Many people in our world will tell you, especially you men, don't let anyone see your emotion. You should deny your emotion. You should suppress your emotion. You should not let anyone understand what it is that you're going through. But the Bible encourages you and I, as followers of Jesus, to pour them out, to pray them out before God, to bring them into his presence. Bring your pain and your problems to the one who's capable of not only changing your circumstances, but changing you. And that's exactly what happened to Hannah. And notice, I want you to see this change that comes over after years and years and years of this cyclical problem. She makes this petition to God. And she says these words, "God, Lord Almighty, if you would just give me a son." Don't you think she's prayed that before? Don't you think that she's been consistent and constant in that specific prayer? But here's what I want you to see. I want you to see the change that takes place in her. She says this, "Lord Almighty, if you would just give me a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." What? That verse kind of confused me for a little bit. Why would she pray that? She says, if you give me a son, God, I'll turn him back to you. I'll give him into full-time ministry. It sounds like she's bartering with God. It sounds like she's trying to manipulate God. It kind of sounds like how we pray. God, if you will just do this, then I will do this. But her request is no longer self-centered. Her request is turned to surrender. And here's a question that I want you to ask, because you should be asking this question. Why would she want a child when she's willing to give him up? When she's willing to give him away? Why would she even want a child in the first place? The cultural reason would say that the reason you should want children is because of status. The emotional, psychological reason was because that would provide you with worth. But there's a theological purpose that's taking place in the heart of Hannah that needs to take place in ours. That she understood. Because all Israelite women knew that when they would bear children, when they would have children, they were participating with God in the salvation of the world. That God was active through his people to bring salvation to the world. And here's something I want you to see, that maybe a different way she would have said it, that all my life I just wanted to be a mother. I've wanted to bring life into the world. But now in your presence, God, I realize, yes, I want to bring life into the world, but I want to bring your life, real life, into the world. I want to bring your life to the people, my people. I want to participate in the bringing of salvation to the world in my tribe, in my neighborhood, at my job, wherever I may be. And listen, as you and I hear Hannah's story and we listen to her pray, we realize that this is not just a story about a woman who wants to have a child. We realize that this is a story about the people of God who have abandoned God and gotten far away from God. And without God, they will have no future. So God hears Hannah's prayer, and he answers her prayer by providing her with a child. And that child would be turned into a prophet, an incredible prophet. That child would grow into a prophet by the name of Samuel, who would become known as a deliverer of God's people. Her problem had served a purpose. See, for you and I, God must be a God not just in the good times, but he must be God in the most uncertain of times. That I need a God with me in the painful places, in the hurting places, in the uncomfortable places, in the problems, the problematic places of my life. And I can just tell you this. I want you to hear my heart today, that never has there been a time like right now for me. As a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I have never wanted more than ever to figure out how more quickly we could help people with their practical problems and the practical things that are going on in their life. And I realize that this principle that comes out of the story of Hannah, knowing her story and knowing Hannah, it doesn't change any of our circumstances. But here's what it does do. It allows you and I, in the midst of our circumstances, in the midst of our problems, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of desperation, to embrace not only the uncertainty, but embrace it with the certainty that God is in control. That although life is uncertain, God is certain. That although life is uncertain and families can be uncertain and finances can be uncertain and futures can be uncertain, God is not uncertain. Last Monday, while I got back into town, our staff began to relay to me the story of a person who had come to the church while I was gone. And this person came to the door, the lobby doors out there. They were locked on that Monday morning because we don't unlock the whole building while just the staff is here. And when they looked outside, there was a woman out there sobbing, and her body was shaking from crying so hard, and she was pulling this large rolling suitcase with all these duffel bags over her shoulders. Everything that she had on her and with her. And Jamie opened up the door to the office and welcomed her inside and offered her a seat on the couch to engage her in a conversation. As she continued to sob, she presented to Jamie the previous day's bulletin, the one that we handed to you. And she handed it to her. She said it had been handed to me by somebody from your church. And while I was out on Marsh and Trinity Mills begging for food, somebody handed me this piece of paper. And the piece of paper, listen, one of us had stopped our car, gotten out of our car, and handed her a bulletin and said these words to her: "This church will help you." The bulletin had 2 names written on it. And Jamie explained that those 2 people's names weren't on staff, but we would still be more than willing to listen to her story and help her out. And that kind of unsettled her even more. She began to cry even more unconsolably, and she declined any food and any water, and she was too upset to eat. And she continued just to cry, and as she began to explain her story, she was leaving a very emotional, abusive situation. And she was desperate to get back home to her family in Oregon. When we asked for her name, she said, "Well, I like to be called Emmy." But when we had her fill out some paperwork to get her some help, she wrote down the name of Aaron, a male. Here's a person who's confused. A person whose problem is identity. A person whose problem is uncertain. She continued to sob, or he continued to sob uncontrollably, and he was leaving this situation and wanting to desperately get back to Oregon, and she was desperate for help and desperate for identity and desperate for her family and desperate for kindness to be showed for her, and whether she knew it or not, she was desperate for Jesus. She said she used to go to church, but she didn't know what she believed anymore. And the tears continued to roll as our staff listened to her story. Her 8 years in Dallas had been a rough situation, and she was being encouraged to call home. And finally, we got her mom on the phone, and her mom said, listen, I'd do anything to welcome you home, son. If you could just get here. Our staff counseled her and consoled her, and the abusive person in her life tried to intervene, but we bought her a ticket. Missy and Cindy drove her to the place to get her home, to get her to a place called home. As that story was being relayed to me, my mind went to this passage in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Some of you may remember it. It just simply says this, and we know. This we know. This we know. With certainty. We know with certainty that there is no guessing, there is no speculation. This we know, that in all things, you and I have been through a lot of things. And your all things are not like my all things, and my all things are not like your all things, and our all things are nothing like Aaron's all things. Hopefully you and I never have to experience what that young man has gone through in his life. But we know that in all things, the next phrase says this, that God works. God works. God is not idle in your problems. God is not sitting back hoping that you will do something. God is waiting and working. Even in the biggest of problems, even in the most severe of pain, God is at work. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. See, your problems have a purpose. When life is uncertain, God is not. He still has the whole world in his hands. He still has your world, your future, your finances, your family in his hands. And all the things that become problems and pain in our life, he holds them in his hands. And God works for the benefit, for the good, for the benefit of those who he loves, who loves him and are called according to his purpose. Those who put their trust in Jesus. God, I trust you to deal with the circumstances of my life. That's my prayer for you today. That no matter what you are going through, no matter what you are facing, that no matter who or what is going on in your life, that you would simply say, you know what, Jesus, I trust you with my life. That's what this church is about. And you need to bring people to a place where they recognize that Jesus is someone that they can put their faith and trust in every day, every moment of their life. Listen, for some of you this morning, you're thinking that your circumstances and your problems and your pain are greater than you can bear. Prayer is the plan. And I want to invite you back into the next room this morning. If you have some things going on in your life, we want to pray with you. Our leadership will be back there. Our staff, our elders, some key volunteers, just to pray with you. For some of you who have not yet said yes to Jesus, like Ethan just did, man, I want to invite you to be humbled enough to let go of life and say, you know what, I need Jesus to be the Savior of my life. I want to invite you there this morning. Let's pray. Oh, Lord Almighty, so much packed into those words. But God, when we say those words, we put ourselves in our place. And we know that our problems and our pain cannot overcome the power that you possess. And Father, right now, I just pray for Aaron, who goes by Emmy, who hopefully has made it home to his mom, who will love him and get him to a place that he needs to be. God, God, I pray for those people in our room right now who are overwhelmed with the problems and pain of this world. God, would they put their trust in you? Would they see you as the source of life to get them through? God, we do love you, and we can't thank you enough for Jesus. It's in his name I pray. Amen.